we did not have a very rich society. We had a very poor society. The community was poor. We didn't get enough money for our education.
Word apartheid. And that
Under apartheid.
apartheid.
Apartheid is a word originating from the Afrikaans language widely used in South Africa. It can be defined as separateness, or the state of being apart from one another. To some, the word signifies darkness, injustice, violence, and suffering. Apartheid was strengthening laws already in place that had oppressed the black population by establishing an institutional system of discrimination that took the form of multiple legislations over the course of approximately 2 decades. Over such time, 148 laws were passed for apartheid, each just as painful to the rights and dignity of the blacks. The Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act in 1948 banned marriages between whites and non-whites. The Population Registration Act in 1950 categorized all people into 4 races: white, black, Asian, or colored. The 1951 Bantu Authorities Act forced all blacks to live in organized homelands, which are really ghetto towns. The Black Laws Amendment of 1952 forced all blacks over the age of 16 to carry passes whenever they are outside of the homeland. And lastly, multiple land acts gave 80% of the land of South Africa to the white minority. It was one of the biggest revoking of human rights in history. Nelson Mandela was born on July 18, 1918, and was born into a family of native South African Hausas. He was the first of his family to receive formal education, which he used to become an attorney for victims of apartheid. In 1944, Nelson Mandela created the African National Congress with fellow peers he met at university, such as Oliver Tambo. It would serve as a non-violent resistance movement against apartheid. This only lasted until the infamous Sharpeville Massacre of 1960, which led to the instatement of the military wing Nkonto Visizwe, or MK. In August 15th of 1961, Nelson Mandela was tried and found guilty for his leadership of MK. He was sentenced to life in prison in the infamous Rivonia trials. He would become an important leader of the ANC who led cooperation instead of conflict. Another major cooperator in the ending of apartheid was a man named Frederick Willem de Klerk, who would serve as South Africa's last apartheid-era president. Born in Johannesburg on March 18, 1936, into a politically accomplished family, it seemed de Klerk was destined for life in politics. De Klerk did well in school, becoming a successful South African attorney. Starting in 1975, he started to get involved in South Africa's politics. Serving the cabinet of then Prime Minister Peter Willem Botha, he eventually reached the rank of Leader of the House. When Botha resigned due to health issues in 1989, de Klerk succeeded him soon after in February. De Klerk would prove to be very different from every single one of his predecessors in his view of apartheid. As the South African economy declined under the plan of apartheid and the country was fraught with instability, President de Klerk needed to make an important decision to put aside differences and for once cooperate with those he had grown up learning they were his foes. It started on February 2nd of 1990, where he gave a speech about a reform his government would have to go through to repeal apartheid. The end goal would put an equal democracy in which all citizens of South Africa, regardless of race, could vote. The first step was taken that very day.
The prohibition of the African National Congress, the Pan-Africanist Congress, the South African Communist Party, and a number of subsidiary organizations is being rescinded.
He also called for the freeing of many political prisoners such as Nelson Mandela, ANC leader Oliver Tambo, and many others previously arrested for treason. 9 days later, on February 11th, Mandela was officially released from Victor Verster prison after 27 years of incarceration. After organization took place on both sides of the negotiation table, the African National Conference and the South African government, or the National Party, met on May 4th of 1990. Delegations included prominent people such as Jacob Zuma, Penyo Maduna, and Aziz Pahad on one side, and Minister Kobe Kotsi and Deputy Minister Rolf Meyer on the other. It was one of the most important meetings in the 4-year negotiation process, and for the first time in almost half a century, the two sides were speaking once again. On August 6th of the same year, a meeting called the The Praetorian Minute paused. State of emergency in the government and conflict related to militant groups affiliated with the ANC. Previously, violence was a big concern with the process of apartheid. The Minute was the first effective attempt at decreasing the violence that had gripped the nation. The next breakthrough came the next year in September of 1991. On the 14th, the National Peace Accord was signed. It was signed by 18 different political parties along with the National Party. They too held importance in that it was the first step towards formal agreements that took place towards healing the divide. It is impossible to ignore the massive step it was towards legitimate cooperation in South Africa. In late 1991, the Convention for a Democratic South Africa, or CODESA, was created. It was created with the purpose of creating a fair constitution. The year had seen too many of apartheid's laws fall, an important one being land laws, which had given the whites more than 4/5 of South Africa's land. The first session started on December 20th of 1999 and would last a few days. Soon afterward, de Klerk's National Party decided to hold a white-only referendum on the matter of government reforms. Though it was disparaged by the previous 2 years' losses on the referendum, the third time proved to be the charm as 69% of the white population voted in favor of the referendum. Now the White National Party also had the approval of the white people, which served as an important benchmark to cooperation happening on the scale of the population and ending apartheid. Quote, part of the continuum of the negotiated settlement towards majority rule in South Africa. On May 15th of 1992, the CODESA II started. Three main issues argued by both sides were the disbanding of ANC's military wing, Umkhonto we Sizwe, and the recreation of the South African Broadcasting Corporation. On the former issue, the ANC eyed suspiciously in the National Party in its efforts to demilitarize its only physical opposition. On the latter issue, the ANC argued that the Broadcasting Corporation had ties with the National Party that would not allow it to be an unbiased third-party news organization. Most important of all, the ANC and its allies reached a deadlock with the National Party on the matters of the definition of a majority while creating an interim constitution. While the National Party agreed for 70% majorities on constituent decisions and 75% majorities for laws concerning rights, the ANC argued for 66.7% on all constitutional matters. Though the ANC did try to reach a compromise, they were unsuccessful and eventually reached a deadlock. A series of violence erupted through the nation following the failure of CODESA. This breakdown showed people two things: how much peace in South Africa depended on cooperation, and also how important the summit had really been. Quite frankly, it had been the only form of equal-sided negotiation that Afrikaners had engaged in with their native counterparts since their ancestors had arrived in South Africa. This shutdown led to the bilateral communication between the National Party and the ANC to be the only form of negotiation still left. Negotiations between individuals such as Cyril Ramaphosa and Rolf Meyer saved South Africa from spiraling into civil war. The signing of the Record of Understanding on September 26, 1992, resumed formal talks between the two sides. It attempted to make the process more efficient by including only the ANC and the National Party in primary decision-making. Into the next year, the negotiations had created a new structure of talking called the multi-party negotiation process, which was formally made on April 1st of 1993, though first thought of in January. It included many different views outside of the ANC and the National Party. On November 1993, an interim government and constitution was finally established, paving the way for a democratic election. It provided a more liberal and non-discriminatory standpoint that came from more than one or two points of view. It was a government and law that was as diverse as the country it would serve. De Klerk and Mandela would jointly receive the 1993 Nobel Peace Prize for their cooperation. From April 26 to April 29th of 1994, South Africa's first truly democratic election occurred. Almost 20 million people of all colors waited for hours through a 4-day voting period. The ANC compiled 62% of the vote, winning alongside the presidency of Nelson Mandela. Following the election, Mandela raised the hand of his opponent, de Klerk, announcing him to be his deputy president. It was an important symbol of cooperation. The victory achieved was not over the National Party, but over the unjust system of apartheid with the National Party. At the end of all, there were no winners or losers, but one unified South Africa made from cooperation for all.